expected because we have quite a diverse, quite a dense, quite an interesting agenda to cover today. And I want to make sure that we have time for all of that. So let me welcome everybody here on the fourth webinar of the C3 webinar series. It's a pleasure to have you today and thank you for your interest. This is the best subscribed C3 webinar so far. And I can see a very clear tendency that more and more people are interested in the work of C3, which I hope is a clear sign that C3 is really delivering value to you, the final beneficiaries of support. My name is Desislava Kraleva. I'm advisor in EIP's Advisory Hub, and I'm actively working on the Circular City Center together with other EIP colleagues, with the European Commission colleagues, and of course with colleagues from Circular Economy who have been helping us to develop the pilot phase of C3. So before we dig into it and start talking about the substance of things, let me start with a few housekeeping remarks. As all other previous webinars, this one is also being recorded, so please keep that in mind. I'd also like to ask everyone who is not presenting, who is not speaking at the moment, to switch their cameras off so that people can focus on the person who is speaking, and also we save a little bit of the connection. As I said, this is the most subscribed webinar, so it's excellent news, but it also means that we need to make sure the connection works as smoothly as possible. I'd also like to let you know that all the participants are muted at the moment. This will remain the case except for the speakers throughout the webinar, but if you want to ask any question, you're free to do so at any point in the webinar in the chat box. Me and colleagues will be monitoring the chat box regularly and asking the questions that you're posing to our speakers. Probably one last point that I want to make is that you will receive a recording of the webinar and all the slides afterwards. So you don't need to worry to be taking too many notes. You can really enjoy the experience and try to take out the most of the presentations. So without further ado, I'd like to ask for the next slide and to walk you and to present you today's speakers. As you see, we will have a variety of speakers, both internally and externally. Each of them will be presented in a little bit more details before their respective interventions. Next slide, please. We have, as I said, a very rich and diverse agenda in which we will be focusing on different aspects of circular urban built environment, which is the topic of today's webinar. And we will start with a quick recap of the Circular City Center in its pilot phase that we have been developing throughout 2022. And we're now concluding in anticipation of its upscaled version in 2023. We will present to you the most recent guide that was developed in the context of C3, and that is a guide on circularity in the urban built environment. This will be presented by Sami Kazemi from Circular Economy. We'll then move on to presenting Arup's toolkit for circular buildings, and we're happy to have Martin Pauli from Arup presenting the guide, presenting the toolkit. Before moving on to Ivan Tung, who will talk to us about the Circular Building Coalition. This shapes the first block of today's webinar. Afterwards, there will be a Q&A session. You can ask your questions in the chat box, be it throughout the presentations or during the actual session. We'll try to deal with as many of them as practically possible. Before moving on to the next session, in which you will hear two case studies, one of them presented by the City of Leuven, and I'm happy to welcome here Line Blanke from the City of Leuven. And another case study will be presented by my colleague Monique Martens, and it will concern the renovation of EIB's historic building. We will then have a panel discussion with the participants in this second block before moving on to an update on various opportunities for circular cities in 2023. And then I'll wrap up and close the webinar, also giving you a little bit of a flavor about what you can expect in terms of next steps on C3. So without further ado, I'll start with the actual content of the webinar and present to you an update on C3 and the pilot phases of the initiative. I'm very pleased to see many participants whom I recognize from previous webinars, and from that point of view, I can see a C3 community forming, but we also have a number of new registrants and participants. So I will kick it off with telling you a little bit about what C3 is, what it does, and how it can help your city, your region in its circular transition. So the Circular City Center is a competence center that provides various resource materials, knowledge, bilateral advisory services to cities throughout the European Union. The C3 is developed with support from the European Investment Advisory Hub in a pilot phase and will be upscaled under the Invest EU Advisory Hub with support from the European Commission, from DG RTD, from this year onwards. It was officially launched in 2021, and last year we were implementing its pilot phase, in which we were experimenting different models, different concepts, different solutions, so that we can really test opportunities, and based on the feedback that we receive from you, the intended beneficiaries of the support, we adapt the services in the pilot phase for the upscaled one that is going to follow. Next slide, please. So C3 is organized in 3 different streams of activity. As a start, it concentrates on creating new resources that aim to support cities' circular transition. And in this context, we have already developed a number of guidance documents, 4 dedicated guidance documents that have been focusing on 15 circular steps in the circular transition, different circular actions and solutions, how to prepare a circular economy strategy. And the latest one, the 4th guidance document that will be presented today, is concentrating on circularity in the urban built environment. In addition to this, we have also prepared a catalog of actually an overview of various documents provided and presented by actors active in the environment of circular economy, so that you can have, so to say, a repository of documents, a reference, a guide that can help you orient yourself quickly and to decide which of the documents could be relevant for your specific circumstance. The second stream of activity of C3 is concentrating on circular city advisory. And what this is, I'll be speaking about it with a little bit more details later on, but it is bespoke bilateral advisory support to cities, which is organized in 3 different trajectories, 3 different curricula, depending on the level of advancement of the cities. In the pilot phase of C3, we developed a trajectory for beginner cities, which are now starting their circular economy transition, for cities who already have a circular economy strategy and are looking to scout a pipeline of circular economy projects, and a 3rd trajectory for cities which already have developed a pipeline and are looking into specific implementation and financing options for their solutions and for their projects, and they're looking for developing their projects to a bankable stage. And the last stream of activity of C3 is actually raising awareness. This has been crucial because what we have seen, what we have experienced, and the feedback we have got from cities is that circular economy is quite a nascent sector, and for many of them, it's a little bit difficult to map it, to map their activities in this area, but also to become aware of all the possibilities that are available. So with this in mind, we have launched this webinar series of which today's webinar is the fourth one. And we have intentionally focused a lot of time and effort on developing cities awareness. Next slide, please. So at the end of the pilot phase, I wanted to make a small recap of what we have done across all these three streams of activity and what is out there available for you so that you can reference it and see how you can utilize it in your daily work and in your city's discussions. And I want to start with the guidance documents that we have developed. As I said, there are 4 of them, and all of them are freely available online on the C3 webpage. There is a link in my presentation, so when you receive it, you will be able to go directly to the guidance documents and reference them. As I said, we developed 3 advisory trajectories for the Circular City Advisory programs, and we already have 7 pilot cities that graduated these programs. One of these cities, the city of Leuven, is also amongst our presenters today. So you will be able to hear from them firsthand about their experience with the program and also the relevance and the merit that they have found in their participation. Last but not least, we have organized 3 webinars. Today's one is the 4th one. We have developed a dedicated web page for the Circular City Center where all the guidance documents are available, all the information that has been developed in the context of the pilot, as well as links to relevant events. And last but not least, we have developed a good network of partnerships with relevant organizations like the European Commission, like OECD, like the Circular Cities and Regions Initiative, like the Circular City Declaration, and many others actually. And we're grateful to be able to contribute with partners in our joint mission of fostering and furthering the aims of promoting circularity. Next slide, please. As I said, I want to focus a little bit on the Circular City Advisory programs because these have been these have been developed specifically for C3, and this is a novel offer that we're already seeing is bearing fruit, and the feedback we're receiving from the pilot cities is quite encouraging as to the usefulness of the Circular City Advisory programs. The way they're organized is like bilateral support to cities. What this means is that depending on the level of progress of the city, we jointly define and determine the trajectory that is most suitable for the city, whether it is the trajectory for beginner city, for intermediate city, or for advanced city. We also identify the relevant stakeholders. We always aim to have a proposal from the city about the circular champion that will act like an ambassador of this topic. And over 4 modules, spaced out indicatively a month apart, we work with the city on a bilateral basis on the delivery of these trajectories, helping them to either get going or continue their activities in circular economy. Just to give you a practical example, if we're speaking about a city which already has a circular economy strategy in place, we work together on identifying projects which have circularity potential, or we discuss a pipeline of projects which have already been earmarked by the city. We discussed their circularity potential. We discussed various aspects that can be strengthened or can be improved. And then we focus on really providing immediate feedback and immediate support on this pipeline that has been scouted. The ultimate objective of these trajectories is that at the end of each trajectory, the city is equipped and is able to move on to the next stage. So if they didn't have a circular economy strategy, they're ready to start the drafting of one. If they have a pipeline of projects, they're able to start looking for specific advisory and financing resources for implementing them, or they're already able to continue with the implementation. Next slide, please. In this, as I said, we have these 3 trajectories. You can find more details about them on the C3 webpage. But I want to make it very, very clear and to emphasize it that it's a joint effort and it's a team exercise. So when we deliver the programs, it is really important that we have the commitment of the city, we have your commitment and active participation, because at the end of the day, the purpose is to help you and to support you, and we need you to help us to help you. Next slide, please. Here I have put the list of cities that we have had in the pilot phase of C3 participating in the Circular City Advisory Program. And you can see that we have had quite a good representation across the 3 curricula. We have had Bergamo and Vienna participating in CCA1, Turku, Murcia, and Leuven participating in CCA2, Prague and Porto participating in CCA3. In terms of who can benefit from the C3, next slide, please. C3 is open to a wide range of stakeholders. You can, for example, if you're a city, if you're a regional authority, if you're a national promotional institution, you're free and welcome to contact us directly so that we can jointly explore the cooperation opportunities. The website of C3, on which all the guidance documents are developed, is available, as I said, free of charge to everyone who is interested. And of course, you're always welcome to register for our webinars and to join the discussion. And next slide, please. I'll conclude with a little bit of a snapshot of what we're planning for the next stages. We, as I said, we're developing now an upscaled version of C3, and we have already received feedback from a number of cities, but any additional feedback is, of course, more than welcome. And we'll welcome your feedback about topics that are of interest and relevance for you in your circular transition. You're free and welcome to express interest to join any of the Circular City Advisory programs. You can do so by contacting us, sending us an email on this email address here, c3@eab.org. You can also send us your suggestions about ways to improve the delivery of C3, both in terms of content and delivery mechanism. And of course, if you have a circular project, a circular program, an example that you feel is particularly inspiring or is worth sharing for other reasons, you're more than welcome to share it with us, and we'll make sure to somehow include it in our outreach and awareness raising activities. With this, I'll wrap it up here, and I'll move on to the next speaker in our webinar. This is Sami Kazemi. And Sami will dig a little bit deeper in the forward guidance document that we have just developed and that has just been published, actually. And we'll present to you the guide on circularity in the urban environment. Before that, a couple of words about Sami. Sami is leading the built environment endeavors in circular economy, and she has generally devoted herself to fostering the circularity in built environment in Europe through participation in various relevant initiatives such as the Circular Buildings Coalition and the Circular City Center, an illustration of which are her activities on this guidance document. She has quite a good and rich track record in supporting European municipalities through multi-sectoral approach, and you will hear her insights gathered through her vast experience in working with cities across Europe. Sami, over to you.
Thank you so much, Desislava, and hello and welcome to all the participants. Thank you for joining us on the webinar today. In the next couple of minutes, I would like to explain to you the paramount role of the cities and what they can help and support in the transition towards the circular built environment. And I will also touch base on the highlights of the guidance document 4, which is concentrated on the circular built environment in the cities. To start, I would like to draw a picture for everyone about how the cities of today and the role of the built environment in these cities. At the moment, why the cities also have to participate in the transition. The cities have a very paramount role in the transition, as we said, because city is a system. And in the cities, we are building and we are living and working. And these are the spaces that we thrive and we do our activities. The current state of the cities is that we keep building and we build new projects, new buildings, we consume resources, and we consume and use the greenfield spaces as the lands for our buildings to build. This is not creating a great situation for us, and as we know, we are facing climatic situation, climate change situation, and this needs to stop. We need to have a better solution and decide on how to make the change in order to create a better environment. How we are going to do this with the help of cities, as the cities have a key role to solve these challenging issues that we are facing at the moment. Next slide, please. We have a great solution to these problems that we are facing at the moment and challenges. The solution is a circular built environment. What do we mean by a circular built environment? Our vision for a circular built environment is a living system that materials and products are in optimum use and the value of resources are kept. In this system, the boundaries of our planet are being respected and we are not overpassing any of these boundaries. We preserve the value and especially the business value of the resources, and we ensure that the well-being and the health of our citizens are kept and secured. The circular built environment is very compatible with accepting actions and solutions from climate mitigation, and also it's very compatible with smart cities, which is creates a great joint forces and actions to bring all those solutions and all those movements together. Also, nature-based solutions could be drawn into the circular built environment strategies, and we can leverage digitalization and digital solutions and tools for a circular built environment. Next slide, please. Now, what needs to happen and how can we move from this current state to an ideal state, which is from this linear built environment to a more circular built environment? There are, for the past couple of years, especially in the European cities, there are many actions and many movements happening on the landscape. But the reality is that these actions are very scattered and very fragmented. And what we need today is more collaboration and scaling of those solutions that are already existing. What can help? Of course, investment is not enough and is lacking at the moment, and we need to create more investment routes and support those solutions and business models. This also, so just to put it in a nutshell, what needs to be done? We need to create more awareness, create more education and training, and this is what cities can really do and use their influence in creating those. Also creating a knowledge-based exchanges and collaboration between different stakeholders in the built environment. We need stronger investment tools and investment instruments and solutions. We also need support from policy and regulations and more incentives towards a circular built environment. Next slide, please. As we said, and I mentioned before, and we all know that the cities have a very important and they have a key role in this transition. We currently build new projects and we continue to extract resources and transport all those materials from around the world, bring them to Europe and use those resources massively. And this needs to stop. And what cities can do is that they can dig into the vast amount of existing building stock and materials that is already available in the cities. And this can, for example, as an example, this can remove one of those barriers. And we all know that, of course, we need logistics, we need to create secondary material marketplaces, and we need so many other efforts to come in. But cities, they are in the position to help and to facilitate these needs. What we can also, there are so many other solutions and other actions and strategies that cities can embed into their action, which we can uncover in this guidance document 4 that we put together. Next slide, please. So just to mention how this guide was created and prepared, it's a joint action and joint efforts between EIB and Circular Economy, and our close work with the cities during the workshops, during many meetings, and working closely, and hours of work and effort that we put together with the cities to create and first understand the situation and the current state of the cities, and secondly, understand the needs of the cities. And what we understood from these efforts was mainly that, just to touch on the highlights, first of all, there are some circular built environment projects happening in the cities, European cities, but there is no clear alignment between those cities. We also understood that, however, that cities are very engaged and they are making some changes. There is not a clear understanding between different stakeholders that who needs to be engaged in the project and when they need to come in. And then lastly, there is a need for clarity regarding the built environment value chain and what are the circular strategies that could be implemented in those projects. So these are the very highlights of our understanding, and you would discover more in the guidance document. Here's a link that will be shared with you as well. I think our colleagues on the chat also, they have shared the link with you, so you can discover more about the guidance document. Next slide, please. What can you learn in this guidance document is also, we have created a vision for a circular built environment for the cities. We have defined the stakeholders and different agents and players in the city, including the planning and decision makers from the city side, the design side. So who are the designers, how can they engage, and what are the strategies they can include? The construction stakeholders, who are there, how can the construction could be utilized and optimized towards circular built environment strategies. What are the operational use? What is the role of maintenance, renovation, repair, and retrofit in a circular built environment that needs to be highlighted? The disassembly and deconstruction, which is a very important also point in the value chain, and end of life, and how we can multiply those end of life and closing the loop and not having just one life cycle for the buildings and the assets that we create. Next slide, please. What can you also learn from this guidance document 4 is the challenging role of the stakeholders. We touch base on who is facing what kind of challenges and how these challenges could be resolved. What is the vision for a new stakeholder collaboration? What is the relationship between the stakeholders in the new vision for the circular built environment? And who are the active participants from each for each player in the built environment? Yes, so who needs to be involved, what is their role, and what actions and strategies is expected from each. Next slide, please. Also in the guidance document, you can see the collaborative ecosystem that the city can build, obviously, and how this could be happen. What is the role of the businesses? What is the role of the citizens and the civil society? what is the role of the academia in this and the knowledge and research institutions, what is the role of the financial sector. From the planning to cooperation and to flexibility, we will touch upon the role of the circular ecosystem for the built environment. Next slide, please. Of course, we will touch on key recommendations and next steps for the cities and to be aware of, and also the stakeholders, because this is a collaborative work and we all have to help as part of the, we are working in the city, or if we are a citizen, this is our role. And here in the guidance document 4, we are touching base on the key recommendations. So we apart from these part of these recommendation is the role of legislative instruments promoting circularity. How can the changing policies, what are the policies required, and how the policies can change and help towards a more wasteless construction, how the public procurement, tender approvals, and handling permits and audits from the city side can be regulated in order to promote the circular practices in the cities. How and when the influence of the stakeholders could be regulated through financial and non-financial incentives. Next slide, please. Also, apart from the key recommendations, going forward for the cities, we touch upon the investment, the role of the investment, and what needs to be invested in the infrastructure and scaling up of the secondary materials market, which is very, very crucial for the cities at the moment in order to make a successful transition. Apart from this, how can cities provide adequate physical infrastructure to maintain and keep and rehabilitate the secondary materials, and emphasize on circular supply chains and make this dream to become a reality? What they need to do, how can they keep the value of the secondary materials at best, and if not, how can they bring in the recycling of secondary materials in order to create more materials in the future? Also, how can the cities develop digital infrastructure? What are the digital needs and for the tracking, whether it's the material passports, whether it's the digital twins, and all that that the cities need to be aware of and to create. Next slide, please. Finally, the role of a part of this, the role of the public and private collaboration. How can the cities can bring in SMEs and startups, create incubation programs, scaling up programs in order to utilize innovation, circular innovation, and create living labs. This is what cities can do. And the capacity building, training of the employers and the staff, also promoting educational programs, creating new skills, green skills, and circular skills and jobs, and also digital skills for the stakeholders. Next slide, please. And by saying that, I pass it on to our dearest Martin Polly from Arup. Please, Martin, over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Sami, for this excellent presentation and for laying the ground for all the presentations that are going to follow. You already mentioned that Martin Pauli is our next speaker. Before passing it over to him, I just want to introduce him with a couple of words and say that Martin is representing Arup. He's the Global Circular Economy Services Leader there. And today he will be presenting to us the Arup's Circular Building Toolkit, which has been developed together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and is a very interesting framework that is available again to everyone who is interested. Martin has educational background in architecture from the Technical University of Berlin with a specialization in sustainability leadership management in addition to it. And I believe he has such a rich and diverse experience that he will share with us many interesting insights. Martin, over to you for the presentation of the toolkit. Thank you.
Thanks, Desislava, and also Sami. And good morning and welcome, everyone. Next slide, please. So I'm really pleased to introduce the Circular Buildings Toolkit and provide some background as to why we've developed that and who was involved. 2 slides on Arup, because I'm aware that not everyone knows who we are and why we are here today. Arup is a collective of almost 17,000 designers, advisors, and experts working across all fields of the built environment. So from the real estate sector to the energy sector, water and infrastructure, and obviously all that is relevant for circular cities. Next slide, please. Just to give an impression as to where we are operating globally with our headquarter in UK and Europe. We are active in over 9 countries, spanning from Denmark through Spain, Italy, but also Turkey. So quite a broad spread. Next slide. We are working very closely in collaboration with other institutions when it comes to circularity, but also other sustainable development aspects. We are global knowledge partner of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and have also recently joined the World Green Building Council Circularity Accelerator Program. And this is just to show you that, and I think this is probably common sense here, that we need to somehow collaborate even more. We need to make sure that we are aligning ourselves, language, principles, strategies, so that we are not reinventing the wheel day to day, because there's quite some urgency towards 2030 and also 2050, and that's why we are very keen to share what we know as Arup, share it with our partners, and ultimately also share it with you. Next slide, please. There's quite a clear ecologic case that we are all aware of. We are afraid that building and asset design, but also infrastructure design, is not yet where it needs to be in order to achieve climate targets and be consistent with all the pathways towards 2030 and 2040. What does it mean? When it comes to building design, what we currently call best practice is pretty far away and is still causing ecological losses. And that's why we are convinced that the principles of circularity will help us achieving a more restorative and regenerative city, but also ecosystems and value chains overall. And I think the punchline here is that we need to move faster, and we really need to rethink the way we are designing the built environment. And we believe that the Circular Buildings Toolkit is one key component in that, as it very explicitly translates the principles into actionable strategies for design, but also for operation of buildings and assets. Next slide. Obviously, there's also an economic case. You all will have conversations in your local context as to why we should adopt the principles, because there's obviously always that talk about it's costing us more money. Yes, no one believes that sustainable development or circular buildings or assets are free and come at zero cost. Yes, there is an additional investment needed, but I think especially in that context, there's a large and wide ecosystem of investors, of capital around, and that's why it's really important to have also that economic discussion. And there are 3 key incentives to adopt the principles for buildings, for infrastructure, but also for cities as a whole. Obviously, it's about risk mitigation. It's about increasing the return on capital, saving cost for carbon, making city operations more greener and more efficient, but also ultimately investing in innovation, attracting new citizens, for instance, to come and to make the city more attractive using the principles of CE. Next slide. So the vision for the Circular Buildings Toolkit, there were three key objectives. First one was that we wanted to create very practical guidelines. I mean, we've seen over the past years a lot of thought pieces, a lot of paper, a lot of initiatives, but what we as Arup were lacking, and also our designers and planners, were really practical guidelines and case studies, for instance, strategies, principles that can be really applied, because obviously there's a huge gap between theory and practice, especially in our industry. Second objective was to make sure that the toolkit is aligned with external policies, to make sure that if those principles are being applied, it is future-proof. And the third objective was to create a framework for innovation and positive impact. So not something that people must do, but something that people want to do, and have fun applying it. Next slide. So we've come up with an entirely digital toolkit that is openly accessible to anyone. I will share the link in a second. So it's there already. It's there since 1 year. We've launched the toolkit during COP26 in Glasgow. And since then, we are seeing a massive adoption all over the world, including Europe. So people are using the toolkit already. They're engaging with all the materials and content that is there. And basically, we said that we need to have three components. One is to learn about the strategies and really get kind of familiar with all that. Ultimately, nothing here is rocket science. We really wanted to kind of translate it into something that is practical and that can be applied day to day. Then we need to, the second component is to engage. So you can update or upload your projects and ultimately also benchmark them against others. Next slide. The framework as such has 4 components or 4 hierarchies. Again, you can access the tool and really kind of familiarize yourself with all those strategies. We believe that building nothing or focusing on the existing built environment is absolutely key. That's not a surprise, obviously. Second hierarchy is to build for long-term value. Third is to build efficiently, and then to build with the right materials. And we believe taking those kind of hierarchy or that hierarchy of thinking will unfold the largest contribution both to economic value and also to carbon contribution. Next slide, please. So you have open access, as I mentioned. We have gathered our most important and kind of the global experts in architecture, MEP structures, to really gather and collect all their insights and experience, and this has flown into those practical guidelines that are accessible. Next slide. So it's not only the framework and the guidelines, it's also quite a comprehensive set of case studies, so that you can really create the trust that this is something real, it is being applied. So case studies spanning from products, material innovation, but also building and district innovation. And I think this is really important because the industry is very risk averse and needs those case studies to kind of create the trust. Next slide. And I think that's already the last slide. I really encourage you to get in touch. This is the Circular Buildings Toolkit. While we are speaking, there's a Circular Transport and Infrastructure Toolkit being developed. Engage also with my colleagues, Janet, Peter Wangsbo, European Circular Cities leader, or Aurel van Richthofen, with a very digital focus. And with that, I hand over to Desislava.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this very interesting presentation. There is already a question to you in the chat box about the intended end users of the toolkit. So who is the user that you have developed this toolkit mostly for? Can you elaborate a little bit?
I mean, we are seeing many kind of user groups. One obviously is designers, planners. But we've also seen developers, even investors, trying to understand how the build, like a circular building, will look like to kind of align their principles and also investment KPIs. And at the same time, we also see city stakeholders, obviously, because ultimately a city is composed out of buildings, transport, infrastructure, energy, and particularly for the buildings, we see more and more interest and traction also on that end.
Great, thanks a lot for that. There are also a few other questions that we'll be taking up in the Q&A session after the next presentation. And now I'd like to introduce to you Ivan Thung, who is representing the Circular Building Coalition. Ivan focuses on circularity in the construction sector with a Master of Science in Architecture and an additional degree in philosophy. He has devoted himself to understanding and planning for sustainable urban environment across the globe. He has wide experience planning for urban recovery and reconstruction in countries like Iraq, Syria, Yemen, but he has also gathered experience in other countries like Somalia, Myanmar, Indonesia, in addition to his current and ongoing work in the European Union. So Ivan is going to present to us the Circular Building Coalition, which is a powerful and important coalition that works specifically on furthering the topic of circularity in the urban context. So without further ado, I invite Ivan and pass the floor to him.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to present our work, which we are actually doing together with Circle Economy and Arab, who you saw before. This is the first slide. Thank you. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so the main reason for this coalition to exist is actually very simple, I would say, and it is to help accelerate the transition to circularity in the built environment. And as a coalition, we do that through three things. So the first is really the development of a shared vision with coalition partners and their networks, and answering the question, what does the circular built environment look like? And then through that process, trying to identify some key points or let's say leverage points for change. So that is answering the question, where can smaller ideas have the largest impact on the transition? What are the types of projects, legislation, and infrastructure needed for this? And then finally, promoting this work and vision through networks, as well as finding parties to work and join us in this journey. Next, please. So the coalition is an initiative of Metabolic, that is where I'm working at, which is a systems thinking organization, among others, together with World GBC, Circle Economy, EMF, WBCSD, and Arab. We then work with a large network of companies, of partners, which we use to reach out and to develop ideas with. Okay, some background on what we're doing. Next, please. So in the first stages of this coalition, we really reached out to our networks, asking what do you see as, or actually what is holding you back towards working towards circularity? And with that outreach, we sort of now see very clearly three challenges that make the transition difficult. They are finance, that's the first one. I think most people joining this call agree that circularity is a worthy goal, but there's many challenges surrounding finance to make that happen. So one of those challenges would be how, for example, do you capture a circular value of a building? If you don't do that, of course, circular buildings won't get funded. Then relate to that, what is the role of public institutions in this financing? You know, is this just something to start, or are they supposed to be involved throughout the whole process? Okay, so finance is one sort of challenge area. The second challenge area are ownership. What kind of ownership models facilitate circularity? I think it became very clear to us working here that split incentive problems are a big challenge for circularity. Meaning with that is who invests and who benefits from a circular building. So what ownership models ensure that investments and rewards are distributed fairly, and what gives incentives for investing now in a building so that you can reap rewards from it later, and how do you sort of connect those? Then finally, markets. The main question there being, how do our current markets need to change to facilitate the transition? How can you create a demand, and how can you create supply, and then how you match those both in space and time for, I would say, secondary materials on the one hand, but then also other materials that can accelerate transition, such as bio-based materials. In order to get those markets working, the other question is, you know, what needs to be changed in policy to make it happen? So part of our work involves sort of deeply understanding the current state of the industry. Next slide, please. In order to do that, we've gone through a bit of a research process on the state of circularity in Europe. What you can see here is the material flows, not of the construction system, but just of the renovation part of the building industry. So these are all the materials coming into the renovation of buildings and flowing out of that. And you can see there, for example, already that just for the material flow of insulation alone, so the insulation of building, which is obviously the biggest component in renovations, there's an outflow of about 1.5 times the weight of a Giza pyramid every year. But there's almost no knowledge on where this ends up, at least on a European level. And so very little is reused, and sort of the materials are lost there. So there's some big challenges there. This is just one part of research, and we will present the outcomes of the full research in March. So send me a message if you would like to be informed of that. Okay, so next. Oh, I think you skipped a few. Yeah, okay. So this research on these challenges on finance, ownership, and markets in Europe is really sort of the first part of the coalition's work. And then what we're sort of moving on now in the next phase is exploring blueprint projects. So that sort of tries to really answer the question, okay, what are the types of projects that can help us accelerate this transition? You know, are there certain types of projects that we can see as sort of templates for change and that address a critical challenge there? So there are 3 slides here. I'm not gonna name all these bullet points, but just an idea of the types of things we're thinking about is, for example, in finance, we might be thinking about how do we capture circular value? Do we need to update methodologies for accounting such that we can better account for different rates of depreciation of building? Next slide. For ownership models, maybe it's necessary to develop some kind of resource center that can help support the implementation of new types of ownership models, such as project as a service models in the built environment for different types of building elements. For example, think of facades, think of cooling systems, think of heating systems. All these kind of things can be done with new ownership models. But there are still some uncertainty and inexperience on that. Next slide. For markets, we may think of facilitating a multi-city mapping exercise that focuses on really understanding where the potential is on the building stock, and then also what is sort of demand for these materials, and then how do you connect these two. So there's a lot of data analysis and sort of the showing of data flows there. And for some cities, this may address one critical barrier of not having information on these flows. You can think, for example, of suppliers or let's say contractors that would need these kind of flows on a day-to-day basis in order to make decisions quickly on whether to use secondary materials or not. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is the final slide, so don't worry, hosts. I'll stick within my time. So then the milestones for this year is we will now go into a process of developing these blueprint projects, and then part of that is also finding organizations that are, well, first of all, interested in developing these projects with us, and then secondly, organizations, and that could be municipalities that might be interested in piloting some of these ideas. And we will try to dedicate some small grants towards that process. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to us in the final slide. Next slide. Yeah, you can reach out to us through the website, circularbuildingscoalition.org, or you can message me directly here at ivan@metabolic.nl. Thank you. That's it.
Thanks very much, Ivan, and thanks very much for keeping the time. It's really interesting to see how the activities and how the observations of the Circular Building Coalition are also coinciding and synergetic with the observations, ideas that have been developed in the fourth guidance document that Sami was presenting. And I think it really shows the level of complementarity between the work of the various organizations that are active in this area. There is a question for you in the chat box, and as we're having such an active discussion also in the chat box, I think it substitutes the Q&A session we had initially planned, which is completely all right. But Ivan, the question for you is, are there also social challenges in terms of adaptability that the Circular Building Coalition is observing?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I mean, it's also, I have to say, a very wide question. So I think I can take this question in various different ways. So what is the social dimension of the transition? I mean, that would be one way, I think, to understand that question, but maybe we can have some clarification on that. Because, yeah, I mean, there's, of course, social challenges in terms of mindsets. You know, there are certain types of mindsets that people have towards owning certain products, whereas, you know, there's also other ways of owning products that might, you know, make a transition better. There might be social challenges that we can see in our research, is that a huge demand of housing is coming, and a part of the demand is that also people are just living in larger spaces. They're living in smaller family sizes. And sort of that explosion will also make it difficult to facilitate a transition. So there's many different social challenges I think you can identify. Yes.
Indeed. Thanks a lot for that. It gives a snapshot into the magnitude of the issue and of the question. And if we get a specification about the specific lens that Vaga, who asked the question, would like to focus on, we can come back to it later in the discussion. But for now, I'd like to move on to the second panel of today's webinar and speak about the case studies of different private and public sector. And as I said, here we have two presenters that will be speaking about the EIB experience in renovating EIB's historical building and about City of Leuven's experience. We'll start with presenting the historical project of reconstructing EIB's building, and I'd like to present my colleague Monique Martens, who is heading actually that renovation project in the EIB. Monique has more than 10 experience in the construction sector, and interestingly, she has been working on the construction of EIB's new building. She also has within the EAB more than 15 years of experience following her educational background in architecture. So she is really able to give us all the private public sector perspectives and to tell us how this issue was approached in the EAB context and what learnings and what experience she can share. So Monique, over to you to present us the case study.
Thanks a lot. This is Slava. So next slide, please. I hope my voice is enough because I was catched by a nice virus that is spreading, but I hope it's still enough for this presentation. So today I would like to present to you what we call here internally the West Building Renovation Project. Next slide, please. So it's a project that is really within the circumstances of the circular economy built environment. I would like here just to recall that this built environment is composed of different elements, and today I will just speak about the mezzo level, that is the buildings. And just to highlight that this level, it's quite complex because each building is unique. And each building is designed for a specific context and owner, and having a specific construction features that make this quite complex. So this historical building of the EAB is located in Luxembourg. It has been finalized in 1980. It was the first building that the bank decided to own. It's quite a huge building. It's 75,000 square meters. It was built by a architect that is famous in UK, for example, for the the Theatre of London. His architecture is also a rational architecture. The building was really designed in a very cautious way, trying to reduce as much as possible the number of materials and their quantity to the very minimum level required. Through this analysis, we were thinking that this is already a kind of very circular approach, and we wanted there to pursue this legacy and consider circular economy as one of the key drivers for this project. Also, a very important aspect here is that the city of Luxembourg have decided to protect this building. So this building is not a monument, but the city considered that this building cannot be demolished and that all these external features cannot be modified. So we can also say here that in this context, cultural heritage parameters are also key drivers for transitioning to circular economy. So next slide, please. So the project drivers, we have considered they are super important to ensure that all our future collaborations with designers, companies, constructors are all aligned with our idea to have a best value for money project, climate and circularity project, a flexible project to ensure that this project can be useful for the EIB or for future other users as long as possible, to avoid reusing and respending materials, time and money. People also, it's important to consider that well-being of future users is key, and heritage because the building is protected, and also because it's the first building owned by the EIB and considered by such as a piece of history for Luxembourg City also. So what do we want to say here is that we would like to pursue a circular design to integrate in the future renovation modularity to ensure that in the future the building can easily be dismantled for future small renovation as small as possible in line with the flexibility driver. Innovation, our other also speakers, they have also emphasized this aspect. Innovation is key to ensure that we are reusing the materials, embedding, let's say, all the innovation that can help to have a high level of circularity. Work collaboratively, supply chain collaboration among all the project people working there is key to ensure that we can source the right materials, that we have the people understanding all these circular features and ensure that we can reuse and recycle as much as possible what is existing, and that we cannot unfortunately reuse within the project itself. During the demolition or the dismantling phase, as you prefer, I would like to consider that the word waste is not the right one. We would like to ensure that as much as possible, everything is considered a resource for something else and is therefore valued. Also, it's important to consider that we would like to ensure that we can preserve the value on site also, and this will be emphasized for the building structure itself. Due to the protection by the city, the external envelope shall be protected, and as it is part of the structure, it comes as natural also to kind of try to protect the structure. Energy, so to ensure that within the project we use as much as possible green energy, and also in an efficient way. It will be also with the help of innovation. And the governance also of the project is important, because it's important to rethink the business model and to explore maybe service contracts for certain parts of certain techniques and lifts and elements, lighting, where the market is already a bit more mature. And to value also the project and what is existing in the best possible way to ensure that all the embodied carbon is valued at its right price, because it is a way to save future CO2 emissions, and this shall be valued within the project. So next slide, please. So for us, the building shall be considered a material bank. And this will be also through the use of material passports. This will help to reduce the future carbon footprint embedded in the future materials that will be integrated, to ensure that they are the lowest carbon ones, and also to ensure the future legacy of the building, that it can be easily dismantled, elements being reused and recycled in a very smooth way. As you can see here, on the right side, the existing building is composed of a massive amount of concrete, which is most of the time for this type of architecture, brutalist architecture. And if you consider, as for this project, then to reuse all this structure and concrete, you are saving a lot of embodied emissions. So next slide, please. So our design brief is then focused on some key aspects. So as I was mentioning, maximum reuse of the overall building structure. Usually this represents a minimum of 60% of the CO2 emissions of a new building. Then by considering to, let's say, keep this in place, we are saving a lot of emissions. Also, we consider a minimum of 70% of material reuse or repurpose. As you know, these buildings have not been designed to be dismantled. And at that time, a design of the 70s were having, unfortunately, a lot of hazardous components. So we cannot today, let's say, ensure that we can really disassemble the elements in a way to be really able to separate always what is hazardous from the non-hazardous. And this is why we cannot go to a very high percentage, but our goal will always to increase this number along the project design. So life carbon analysis, life cycle analysis, it's key. When we will ask for solutions, we will ask what is the LCE associated, and if there is other products that have a better LCA to ensure the minimum of embedded emissions, and also that the future components have, as long as possible, a long life cycle, and that they are also easy to dismantle and to recycle. Renewable energy. So we have also here a huge challenge due to the fact that everything outside is protected. So we cannot use the standard PV panels or other standard things. So we really need to use innovation to find out how to have renewable energies on site. Of course, another key resource is rainwater and used water that we want to reuse directly also. And we would like also to have a certification, which is important to show that these circular projects have a very high level of certification, BREEAM WELL, and we will also use the levels of the EU Commissions. And what is also important that we would like to increase the biodiversity of our gardens, because for us the project is not just the building itself, but also its surroundings. And this dialogue between in and out shall be also important, and this is why we are considering this is also key to increase the biodiversity of the gardens. Next slide, please. So we are now on the phase to prepare the design contest for the project. We consider, as it is a big project and a particular architecture, we need a call for ideas and innovation that we can after embed in the future development of the project. We consider key this collaborative aspect to ensure that there is not only designers and engineers and maybe construction companies, but also suppliers that work together to see how we can reach a very good level of circularity, and how we can repurpose as much as possible the elements that are existing in the building within the project. Also, we would like to see how regenerative are the solutions proposed and how we can achieve overall carbon neutrality of the project. So thank you. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Monique, for this very inspiring example. And I already see that questions are coming through, specifically focusing on circularity in buildings that are cultural heritage and that have a protection status. So there will be an opportunity to discuss this in details during the panel discussion, because probably Liene has also a lot to share on that topic as well. But thank you very much for this very good example. It's really exciting to also be able to witness it taking place in real life. With this, let's move on to Liene Blanke from the city of Leuven, who will be sharing Leuven's experience with regard to circularity in the urban built environment. Liene is working in the sustainability department on circular economy of the city. And here I need to say that Leuven is a very interesting case because it is one of the 100 climate neutral cities, one of the 100 cities that have been selected to become climate neutral. It is also very active on a new climate mission. And it is also very interested in circularity and how actually advancing the topic of circularity can support transversally all the ambitious objective that Leuven has set for itself. So without further ado, Liene, I'm handing it over to you and looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks. Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me?
Perfectly well.
Okay. Yes, you can go to the next slide. So first of all, I will present our strategy or plan towards a circular built environment in the city. But first of all, I want to mention that it's really a work in progress, a learning progress as well. We're not there yet. I want to share our experiences, our fails maybe, but just to make sure that we're still working on it very hard. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So a short introduction about our circular strategy. We launched it in 2019. We're focusing on 5 main objectives and 28 smaller action points. We have a stakeholder platform called Leuven Circular to follow up on this strategy. We come together every 3 months with the most important stakeholders in the city. We have universities, civil society, and so on. Circular construction is one of the main objectives. And as mentioned before, because of our new mission to become climate neutral, we all know the construction industry has a very large impact. So in 2023, we really want to focus on this objective within the circular team. Yeah, next slide, please. So besides our circular strategy, we also have some other objectives in action plans from the city, the mission that was written a few years ago. As you can see, some things also concerning a circular building environment. We will try to build climate neutral buildings, of course, but also use more circular materials, increase the involvement of the materials bank, where we'll talk about later. Just overall objectives that need to be more specified, but I will talk about it later. You can go to the next slide. So last year we decided we really need to go to a more specific, more detailed action plan for the circular built environment. We already had some pilot projects. I will give you two examples. There's more in the pipeline. First of all, we started the Materials Bank in Leuven in 2020, which is together, we developed it together with a non-profit organization in Leuven, and it actually means that they can urban mine all of the construction sites or new building sites from the city of Leuven, and mine whatever material they think could be reused or resold. Yeah, they resell it, so that can be resold again in the city. It's a very beautiful project. I think the first year we recuperated 40 tons of construction waste, and we're well above that at the moment. Our goal is 100 tons in 2023, and I think it will be feasible. We're also thinking about scaling up the materials bank in other ways, maybe creating satellite material banks near construction sites to limit the transport in the city. We're also convincing major patrimonium stakeholders in the city to also work together with the material bank. So yeah, we can really scale up the impact. Second, there was a circular renovation of 3 studio apartments in the city. The apartments were bought by the city really to experiment with all different kind of circular strategies, not only reusing materials or furniture, but also investigating projects as a service or bio-based materials, and really doing research about the costs of this circular principles, how we can integrate it into procurement policy. So it really was a test case, 3 test cases, but we finished them and the apartments look really beautiful. But we also learned a lot, like some things are just not feasible within a city, within the city departments or within the city structure. Other things are easier, and so on. Yeah, you can go to the. So besides some pilot projects, we also really try to integrate circularity in our procurement policy. One example is we have an agreement with the material bank that they can urban mine first on every construction site of the city. So yeah, they can visit the construction site first. They can see whatever they think it can be reused, and they have the first choice. Next, besides this, we also oh, you can go back for a second. Yeah. Yeah, as I mentioned before, we're also really evaluating our pilot projects and really making a circular map or guidance tool, what we can use, what can be used, which departments need to be involved, and so on. We did 2 workshops within the ProCirc project, really on how to integrate all those principles in our procurement policy, because it's really not an easy ride. Besides this, we're also really think the importance of monitoring could not be underestimated. We need to see how much impact that we're making to become a climate neutral city. The University of Leuven created a circular monitor. It's not finished, but we do know where we need to focus on, and of course housing and the built environment is a very important one. So all our work done with the material bank, for example, is monitored, so we can communicate about the impact and see where we need to invest more. Yeah, next slide. So I mentioned in the beginning, we're working on an action plan. We launched the action plan last November. It's finished, but we still need a lot of work to actually do all of these action points and topics. But together with our city development department and our build department, we decided on 8 topics that need to be completed or need to be involved in this kind of action plan, and 16 smaller action points. I'm happy to share this action plan. We're currently really focusing on the policy. I mentioned in the beginning, we do have some objectives in our policy papers from the city, but they need to be more specific and detailed. So we're really trying to figure out what is possible as a city, what needs to be done by 2030, and how can we tackle this with as many stakeholders as possible. The procurement process is really happening and taking some good steps, but we can always learn from other cities, so feel free to share experiences. And the other topics, it's, as I mentioned, it's a progress, it's a learning progress. We're trying to tackle them all, and hopefully we can talk about updates in the next few months with you guys. I think, yeah, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, I also wanted to mention we're working together on the Circular Advisory Program, specifically for the built environment, to see the project that we can scale up, and how Europe Investment Bank, Circular Economy, and all the partners can help figure out what to do as a city. Okay, thanks.
Thanks a lot, Line. And thanks for also referencing your work under the Circular City Advisory Program, because I'm sure that other peer cities will be interested to learn more about that, as well as specifically about your experience with implementing circular economy principles in protected buildings. But we now have an opportunity to actually discuss these topics during the panel discussion. And I want to pass on to my colleague Jonas Byström, who is lead engineer in the Circular Economy Division of the European Investment Bank, and to Claudia Alessio, who is a city strategist in the Circular Economy. And they will be moderating the discussion. So if you have any other questions that you have come up with after listening to these 2 presentations, you're free to type them in the chat box and we'll try to cover them. Jonas, Claudia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Desislava, and thank you all the presenters for what I think was really interesting and insightful presentations that we really hope will inspire circular action and circular change among the participants. I think you have made it very clear that there are really good reasons and also a lot of potential to take a more circular approach, a more circular route in developing the built environment, and that also would reduce both material and carbon footprint. And like Monique also said, preserve heritage of different kinds. But while this make really good reason from many points of view, like you all highlighted, and may also in theory seem easy, I think that many who have tried, many cities who have tried to take this approach have found that in practice it can be a bit more difficult. And there could be questions to raise to those who have tried and maybe reached a bit further. And that is what we've seen in the chat. Many good questions and many good points raised. And Claude and I will try, even though time is a bit less with us than we thought, to cover some of these. And there was a question from Bruna Coimbra Murisi first, and I would like to address that to Sami. How do biomaterials work in a build for the long-term value? They do have shorter lifespan compared to the business as usual counterparts such as concrete. So increasing wood in circular buildings, for example, or other renewable biomaterials, what are the ways to ensure that they can fit in that context? Sami, anything to say in response to that?
Jonas, I think Sami had to leave the meeting, so maybe Martin.
Then I ask Martin, yeah, for example.
Yeah, good point. I think bio-based materials will play obviously a super important role because what we're seeing is that countries like France, Denmark, Finland are now implementing benchmarks with respect to whole life carbon performance of buildings and assets. Excuse me, can you hear me? Because it seemed...
We can hear you well.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, sorry, because it's frozen on my end, but it's good. So there are new benchmarks coming up with respect to the whole life carbon performance of buildings. And you can only meet those benchmarks if you introduce bio-based materials. And wood and timber is obviously an obvious solution. Because it's technically working well. There's also a lot of innovation going on with respect to internal finishes and fit out materials, where we need to replace the more carbon heavy materials like gypsum boards, for instance. And there, the shorter life cycles are actually not a problem because there's evidence that every internal fit out is being replaced, I don't know, every 4 to 6, 7 years. So in that sense, that works. However, I think at the same time, we also must continue focusing on decarbonizing existing and established construction materials because there's a supply chain in place, there are value chains in place, and that's why we shouldn't ignore materials that might be obviously very carbon heavy, like concrete and steel. However, realistically, we will continue using those materials, and that's why we must apply circularity principles also for them.
Thank you, Martin,
very much, Martin. Thank you very much, Martin. Good introduction to what is a very relevant topic and something I think that will warrant further attention going forward. Ivan from Le Chao Santiago addressed a question which I think we can actually ask Ivan to respond to, related to implementation and the regulation flexibility, how municipal approval permits and other regulatory tools and levers can promote and pave the way for a more circular built environment. What would you say are the key municipal or maybe also national levers, tools, regulatory instruments that really can make it easy to do the right thing in this context, to build and manage more built environment more circularly?
Yeah, I do think it's really an important question. And clearly municipalities like local city governments, regional governments and national governments have a huge role in facilitating the transition. They can relate to many things. For example, municipalities can mandate, for example, that you need to do a pre-demolition audit before you destroy a building, so that there will be information of the things that come out of the building. There's of course lots of discussion always about green public procurements. So how can in the procurement processes can we introduce standards to which offers need to comply in order to be considered for acceptance? Then there's many things related to, I mean, you can go to, I think, an even more fundamental level. For example, if you make some kind of urban plan, what if you designate some areas or some land uses as, okay, you can only build residential buildings here, but they need to be circular. You know, how does that change, let's say, for example, the equation in terms of what's the value of that land, and then what kind of people would buy it in order to build something. So yeah, there's a lot of things that can be done there, and I'm sure that municipalities are experimenting with them as we speak.
Very good, Ivan, and maybe a good thing to start to explore as a kind of first step in order to kind of create the enabling framework. Claudia.
Thank you, Jonas, and thank you for all the questions. We have a few more that we can answer from the audience. For example, Monique, there is a question around the cultural heritage of the building, because indeed we have Lavinia from Italy that says that often protected buildings cannot extensively be touched or repurposed. So maybe you can expand on this. Like, would the EIB even have taken this circular path to renovating this building if it had not been given this architectural heritage status by the city?
Yes, exactly. Thanks, because I think this is an important question, because in this, we can see that this is creating a movement. If you think that in the mindset of investors, what is important or what is key is something new. In the mindset, this is where you have the utmost value. And by creating this cultural heritage, this pushing for keeping something in place and valuing it, you are creating a movement where you create supply chains for renovating what is existing, from having this more and more with increasing the amount of companies that can do this work. And just by doing that, you are creating a kind of chain of value where you value what is existing on site in an existing building. This can be seen as, let's say, something with a lot of, let's say, constraints, but it is only by this way that we will create the first stones and steps to show up how these companies have this value in their hands, all these people that know how to recreate value from old things. And this is where cultural heritage helps a lot. And then with these people, you can make, let's say, also the work on protected buildings. Indeed, if the building would have not been protected, the EIB would have thought twice before considering renovating it. But as it is protected, you have no more choice. And then you can count on all these companies that know how to renovate these, let's say, monuments, also to help on this, to really know how to have the right workforces to work on these materials, because it is key to have the right people that have ideas and know how to reuse the materials also on site, which is really helpful. Because if not, you need also to find out another project when you can have the repurpose of your elements. And this is why really, I know it looks a huge effort, cultural heritage, but it is a great, let's say, effort for running the circular economy.
Thank you, Monique. And it's great to see also how kind of thematic themes from this webinar coming back, the idea also like of social and cultural challenges, as well as the cooperation that is needed. And maybe also one question to Lene from the chat. There was someone that also wanted to know if you only focus on own buildings, so city-owned building projects, or to which extent you collaborate with private builders and developers.
So our action plan is focused on buildings from the city. I think it's the first step to give a good example as a city. But we also organized in the last few months, we organized meetings with private partners. We maybe have an exceptional case in Leuven because some private, there's a few amount of private partners that have a lot of buildings, that own a lot of buildings. We have a big university in the city, we have a big hospital, we have IMEC, which is a big sort of spin-off from the university, and they own a lot of buildings in the city. So we are in discussion with those private partners, semi-private partners, kind of public, to convince them to work on circularity. But we also discovered that a lot of private actors are already thinking about this and working on it, and I think we can really help each other. Besides this, we also are in contact with a lot of like commercial players, more like contractors, big building companies, to see how we can involve them. For example, working with the material bank, and also there a lot of commercial players also are thinking about circularity. They work in the built environment. They know there is a less and less resources available. So yeah, they already are making the shift, and I think we can only help each other. So
yeah, and in the guidance document number 4, we do lay out what kind of stakeholders will need to help, and how their role will change. So that also can maybe expand on this on the answer to the question that was posed in the chat. But maybe back to you, Jonas. I think maybe.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one final question. It's a question that was posed by Vara. What are your views on sufficiency in the circular built environment sector? I think a very relevant question, asking, I mean, how can we make do with less floor space, more co-use, etc. Martin, you indicated that this will really be key in going forward. And you said we need approximately 30% higher efficiency to meet the 1.5 degree target. The question is maybe how to approach this increased efficiency, but also ensure that we have sufficiency in the planning. Anything that, Martin, you can add, or any of the other panel members can raise as a key to factor in sufficiency in planning and in implementation?
Okay, now I can speak. Sorry. Yes, the topic of sufficiency is being raised again and again for good reason. If you look at some evidence, for instance, the square meter per person, this has increased massively across countries and also cities. So it's a bit of a behavioral aspect. A bit cynical speaking, the price raise in cities like Berlin, Amsterdam, and London will probably mitigate these effects. But obviously that shouldn't be the mechanism. I think cities can control that if they are encouraging particularly developers to think about new ways of living, of co-living concepts, community concepts where spaces are being shared. So I think this is all there. Cities need to find the right governance models and mechanisms to really unlock that. So that's, I guess, with respect to the space efficiency. With respect to material efficiency, I gave some examples. There is scientific evidence that 30% less materials need to be achieved. And obviously, we cannot directly build thinner steel reinforced concrete ceilings that don't comply with codes, but they are very smart material innovation concepts. For instance, there's a project called Life Cycle Tower in Austria, where timber and concrete are combined in a way that both materials are working to their strength. So I think this is something that also cities must explore to be informed when it comes to developers are approaching them, architects, planners, and really kind of are confident that those targets are actually achievable.
Thank you, Martin. A very brief follow-up and final question to Monique. In the IAB renovation project of this architectural heritage building, is sufficiency in any way considered? Are we going to have less floor space per EIB employee sitting in that building in the future?
So yes, of course, the idea is to, let's say, try to be more efficient, and then to also use as less as possible materials also for the renovation. The idea is to come to find the right balance between what is the place allocated for a person and also the place allocated for more collaborative areas. So to think also overall what is the future of office space if we consider the teleworking. That is also another way to share the private space versus the space of the organizations. But
Thank you very much.
Just to come back one word, it's also a way to design, as it was said by Martin, this sufficiency. It was always used, as I was mentioning, for some building after the Second World War, where resources were scarce. It was having no other way than to think to reduce as much as possible the resource use for the buildings. And I think there is this somewhere in the heads of the architects. It is more to try to revamp it, and because solutions are existing and innovation is also helping on that.
Thank you very much, Monique, and thanks to all the speakers, and also a big thanks to the audience. We have got a lot of questions that unfortunately time did not allow us to address, but they will be fully and well considered in the work that C3 will take forward. So we will hope to be able to, either bilaterally or in future webinars, see if we can address that. Thanks to all, and I leave the floor to Desislava. Thank you. Is Desislava with us?
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much to Jonas and to all the panelists, also to the participants for the active questions. I'll pass it on to Claudia, who will briefly walk us through several very interesting, very relevant initiatives to look forward to in 2023. And this is going to be the last presentation before I finally wrap the webinar and tell you a few words about the future of C3. Claudia, over to you.
Thank you. So indeed, it was great to hear about so many initiatives and actions towards a circular built environment. And I hope all participants have found some inspiration to take back to their work. But before we conclude the webinar, the team also wanted to update you on other initiatives that you can look forward in 2023 to advance your ideas. And if you go to the next slide, we can talk about the Circular Cities and Region Initiative. That is an initiative of the European Commission, launched as part of the EU Circular Economy Action Plan 2020. So what it is an experimental multi-stakeholder collaboration and support scheme. And the main aim is to develop local competences and capacity through both kind of technical and financial support, so that cities, but also regions, can translate their ambition into actions. So there are, how it's structured is around associated partners that are involved in this initiative to bring expertise and disseminate results. There is also, of course, the European Commission as the main provider of financial support. And there is a coordination and support office that is created to facilitate the implementation of many activities. And then cities and regions are at the core of this, either in quality of pilot cities, so cities that the initiative works with because they have a high circularity potential, or fellows, so there to share and expand their knowledge. And Leuven, for example, is one of the fellow cities in this initiative. So why are we talking about this? Well, what's important here is the many upcoming projects that the CCRI offers, and that could be beneficial for cities and regions in Europe. If you go on the next slide, we can see one specific project, Circular Invest. This project is part of what's called PDA, so Project Development Assistance Services, provided by the Circular Cities and Region Initiative. There have been 7 PDA projects funded so far, one of which is this Circular Invest project. And they're all about helping project promoters to get technical, economic, and legal expertise to develop bankable investment projects. So we go back to the idea of how can we make all the economic case for all these projects. And in particular, Circular Invest will support project promoters in accessing resources they need to develop these projects at a local and regional scale. Projects, for example, focusing on the built environment could be part of this. So if you qualify as a beneficiary, your project could be interesting for all of this. And what qualifies as a potential beneficiary is either public and private project promoters, such as local and regional authorities, as well as public or private infrastructure operators of utilities and services, and also other industry stakeholders, including small and medium enterprises. So what you can expect is to receive assistance also on business plan development, commercial strategy development, review of financials, identification of investors and due diligence preparation, also help with the intellectual property rights and regulation, as well as help with the stakeholder and community mobilization. So, but how can you access all of this? The next slide, please. In April 2023, we will publish on the Circular Invest website the first call for expression of interest. So you will be asked to present your project. We will then select the most promising ones with the help of an independent committee, and those selected will benefit from all the services that we've just seen. And this could be in the form of a tailored expert support, but also knowledge transfer, networking, as well as peer-to-peer workshops. Of course, all of this with the aim to get those selected projects ready for funding. So please keep an eye on the website and start gathering information on your projects. And you can also use the websites to submit any questions. So now I think we're reaching the end of the webinar, so I'll leave it back to Desislava to conclude.
Thanks very much, Claudia. And indeed, we have reached now the end of the webinar. So before closing and thanking everyone for making the time to attend and for your active participation, I want to say a few words on the topic as such and on the next steps, what you can expect from C3 moving on. On the topic as such, this basically the feedback that we have been receiving throughout the pilot phase of C3, and also the high numbers of participants and their active participation in the webinar show really how important circularity is for the built environment. There is a lot of potential, there are a lot of specificities like we discussed about cultural heritage buildings. There are a lot of opportunities and a lot of innovative approaches that are being developed and tested in terms of how to advance circularity in the urban built environment. So watch this space. We acknowledge and take account of the importance of this topic for you as the ones implementing these solutions on the ground. So we will definitely be revisiting it and paying even more attention to it in the future. Talking about the future, as I was saying, we are now concluding the pilot phase of the Circular City Center and simultaneously preparing the upscale of the initiative. The upscale is going to become available throughout 2023. So another thing to watch out for. And our purpose is to take on board the feedback that we have received, the ideas that we have generated together with you, the participants in the various streams of activity of C3, and to take them on board for an even better upscaled version of C3, which will take a balanced approach between awareness raising, developing guidance documents, and really working hands-on, one-to-one with cities on developing their circular economy agendas. So in case you have any other ideas, any case studies, anything that you consider and believe is important to keep in mind, we're always open to receiving ideas and suggestions. So feel free to send us an email at the c3@eib.org. And if we flip to the next slide, you'll be able to also see the email address. You're also free to visit the webpage of C3, access all the documents, and take them into account already now when designing and implementing circular solutions. But in any case, stay tuned. This is my main message. Stay tuned, get in touch with us, send us an email with ideas and proposals. We very much appreciate the open communication channel that we have established and the C3 community that we're now developing and seeing growing. With this, I'd like to thank everyone once again for participating in today's webinar, for actively contributing with questions, with thoughts, with sharing experience. And I look forward to meeting you, maybe even in person, for the next C3 webinar. Thank you and have a good day ahead. Goodbye.